Live from Microsoft Ignite, you're listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the Azure DevOps Podcast. We are live from Microsoft Ignite, and you can go to www.azuredevops.show for other episodes and show notes. And I'm talking to several people, but here in front of me, I'm talking to Greg Leonardo, an Azure MVP, who's working on a new book that's listed on Amazon, and we're here live at the conference. Greg, thanks for joining me. How are you enjoying the conference so far?
Oh, this is great. I always love coming to these conferences because we get a little insight into what Microsoft does ahead of schedule, but it's always the stuff that sneaks in the door that we don't get to see that's always the fun stuff to learn here. So, some good stuff.
Now, you're writing a book that's already listed on Amazon, so you already know all the new stuff that's coming out, right?
Yeah, I learned this week that I don't know all the new stuff coming out.
More stuff.
There's more stuff. Like front door. We never got anything really on the front door points, how it fixes some of the issues. So I'm doing some research this week on looking at app service certs and how I can use the SSL offload capabilities to span subscriptions now, which used to be a problem. So I don't know if that's doable yet or not doable. So I have to see how that actually works.
Well, let's talk about that stuff. But how did you come into the Azure space? Because of course, none of us were using Azure when we first started our career. So what's your journey been?
Well, my journey really was about when I started my own companies, because I've been running iterations of my companies for years. One of the things I got into is I hated having that server in my back office that made the room 3,000 degrees, but the rest of the house was like 78. Mm-hmm. And having to put the AC unit in the back room in order to cool it because I had the server back there. Then moving out to facilities, and the cloud is just an evolution to me that got me out of the business of even having to worry about infrastructure anymore. I could just put my workloads out in the cloud and be done, and not have to worry about is the server up and running? Do I have the good connection from the house? Good connection from the data centers? Anything that I was doing. So to me, it was an evolutionary process that I adopted early because as a small business guy, I didn't want to own all that stuff. So I wanted to offload it to somebody else and not have to worry about it.
Awesome. And you're here in Florida, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Tampa, Florida.
There's something going on in the local community.
Yes. One of the things that we began out there is we started looking at ways to change how the community engages. So we changed our code camp to a community connect. And we started looking at different innovative ways to not only teach tech, but to teach developers and people out there how they can further their abilities with their own businesses and soft skills and things that really affect the community as a whole. I mean, you can teach anybody technology. Sometimes you can't teach them how to interact with their social, being able to, present, being able to write a resume, and all the soft skills that help these people that once they get the skill, they're able to transform that into something else. Even starting their own business. We both know starting our business is not an easy thing to do. And, we've gone through our trials and tribulations of trying to figure that out. Now it's people are able to start sharing that sort of stuff so that these guys get a jump start on creating businesses and innovation, within the local communities. So it's really cool.
That's awesome. And you and I share something else.
Yes.
VetsinTech.
Yes, we are. VetsinTech. And that's another interesting thing because we were actually working with some groups out in Tampa to bring a VetsinTech arm out to Tampa because we do a lot with the veteran community out there as well. But we're bringing VetsinTech and trying to get people also retrained as they come back from these hot zones in different areas throughout the world to get them retrained, to move over to civilian life, because a lot of these guys may not have taken technology, but giving them technology in order to, provide for their families is a really good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. We have 2 other veterans besides myself working at ClearMeasure.
Yep.
And there's a pretty good community going on in Austin as well. So you mentioned front door.
Yes.
But of course, if you weren't at the conference, you didn't go to the session perhaps, people are thinking, well, I have one of those. It's on the front of my house.
Yep.
So what is that in the Azure space?
Well, and this is just preliminary for me and some of the things that I sat through, but it's really the entry point, being able to load balance the app services and things that you have in the cloud. So it's really nothing more than providing an input channel into your applications or your offerings in Azure. Now, how far that's going to be taken remains to be seen. Like I said, it's something new for me to dive into. I get it. I understand what they're trying to get at, because it's almost like it's an application manager, appliances that we used to see, but now this is a cloud-based version of it. So I'm going to play with that this week, see how far I can take it. Maybe I'll do a follow-up with you on exactly what I figure out about it and where it can go and how it can be used.
Awesome. And where could folks go to find that information?
GregLeonardo.com. That's my blog.
That's too easy.
Yes, it is very easy. I stick with the easy stuff.
Right. Back in, in the 90s, there was a domain rush going on, and I wanted to register my last name, Palermo.com, and it was taken. And it was taken by a plumbing company in New Jersey, Palermo Plumbing. And so I've had Palermo.cc ever since.
Right.
And all the family members have email addresses and whatnot.
Right.
But then later on, I got a notice that it had changed, and I had put in a watch with GoDaddy, and some travel company, it didn't get renewed. Then the travel company sniped it up, and I missed an opportunity there. And now it's just this, landing page for travel to Palermo, Sicily. And I'm like, come on.
That's pretty good, though.
So I missed out twice. I have JeffreyPalermo.com. That's good enough.
Yeah, that's like I said, first and last name always works out.
It does.
You can figure out that I could never grab Leonardo either, so.
Right. Oh, shoot, yeah. Gosh.
So it's same boat.
Right. All right. Well, what other interesting things are in your book that might not be common knowledge?
Well, the way I structured my book was to take people on the journey for what Azure is. I mean, a lot of today, people run into the sense of urgency, right? They want everything now. They want everything, in a way. And I wanted to really give people the journey, what I went through from trials and tribulations, things I learned, past where I came from, things I do in order to figure out how to do things in Azure versus just the traditional, this is how you do it. You go do this, you do that. Because as you and I both know, the world changes from a technology perspective so fast that the way we do stuff today isn't the same way we do it tomorrow. So, it's almost like the football analogy. You can teach somebody blocking schemas and other things, but in football, there's fundamentals. And I try to stick to the fundamentals in the book to give people the ability to find the things that they need to, and then to be able to adapt to the changes in those environments so they can figure it out. So I kept my architecture chapter around some of the fundamentals of architecture, things you need to do, how you look things up in order to find the newer technologies that you want to use, how to adopt them, how to fail fast, learn faster, do all the little things. And then I kept a lot of the key architecture points in pieces like app services and things like that when you're going through the development cycles, things that you need to take into account from an architectural perspective. So I didn't want to front load it with, here's how you do everything and slice it up, then go to a chapter on how you develop the solution, and then reference back to a chapter that was 3 chapters ago. So
yeah, awesome. And when is it going to be released?
It's supposed to be released in mid-October. I think on Amazon it's listed to be out November 2nd.
Okay, and the title?
It's Building Solutions in Azure.
Awesome. Well, hey, Greg, thanks for joining me. This is a really wild, massive conference.
Yes.
Do your feet hurt yet?
Yeah, my feet have hurt each and every day. The big thing here for me is there's a lot of good content, but it's also meeting people and understanding their journeys. Because I ran into a guy at the community center over here that was talking about his trials and tribulations on getting to Azure and why he came. And a lot of people pick different reasons for coming to these conferences, right? Some people are coming to learn. Some people are coming to learn what they really don't know. So they have no idea all of this stuff. So it becomes overwhelming for them to figure out how they do that. And these are guys that are innovating. So they struggle through, well, I have Azure adoption, but I also have DevOps, because now I heard this, Azure DevOps. And, explaining to them that those journeys are the same. Yeah. You got to mirror them up. So you've got to take things a little more closer to heart and look at the things that have synergies together. And I showed him that, the journey to DevOps is the journey to Azure. It's learning how to do things. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you deploy them, how you do them, but you're creating repeatable processes. And those things help not only operations folks, but devs deliver that. And then at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you put it, right? So
Awesome.
Your journey to Azure becomes the end result of your, building a DevOps portion in. So it's really cool.
That's great. Well, thanks for joining me, Greg.
You're welcome.
The Azure DevOps podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
So now I've got a very boisterous group of people here. We have Gaverick and Colin Dembovsky and Rob Richardson. And let's go around and introduce ourselves. Josh, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. So I'm Josh Gaverick. I am an MVP in Application Lifecycle Management. I am an application architect at 10th Magnitude out of Chicago.
Awesome. And Rob, who are you?
I'm Rob Richardson. I'm a Microsoft MVP in ASP.NET. I build web properties for small and medium-sized businesses, and I really love speaking at conferences. So I got to speak today a few minutes ago, and that was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Colin?
Nice. Hi, guys. My name's Colin Dembovsky. I'm also at 10th Magnitude with Josh. I'm a cloud solution architect there, and I've been an ALM MVP for a number of years in what used to be VSTS and is now been rebranded to Azure DevOps.
Cool. So listeners can hear the conference around us. I mean, it's just crazy on my feet. How has it been for y'all? Your feet hurt yet?
Oh, absolutely. And I bought a new pair of shoes to come down here because I knew that my Vans weren't going to cut it.
Yes.
And my woofers are barking.
Awesome.
It's a lot of walking, but it's all indoors this year. Last year we were walking across the Sky Bridge too, and so it was a lot of walking and it was a lot of humidity. So I think they made a really good choice, just kind of leveraging this building exclusively for the content, and that worked out really, really well.
Awesome. Now, Rob, you literally just finished giving a talk here at the conference.
Yeah.
And what were the highlights? What were you trying to get the audience to understand in that talk?
The talk was serverless in Microsoft Azure. And typically when we think of serverless, we're like, oh, Azure Functions, and we jump straight to the end. I took a different approach of saying serverless is when we trade the things that we want for the things to outsource the things that we don't need. And so I started with Azure Virtual Machines, and I said, in Azure Virtual Machines, I am outsourcing creating that machine, but I still get to own the machine from now on. I get to patch it, and I get to update it and care for it. Taking it to the next level, Azure Websites, I've outsourced the machine. I just have my app running in an interesting way. And so we walk through VMs and web apps and containers where I'm outsourcing all kinds of underlying pieces. And then ultimately web jobs and Azure Functions, where in Azure Functions I've outsourced even the process. I just have a function, and when the job needs to run, it does it. And so the beauty there is that Azure has lots of places where it can meet you where you are to say, I want to own this piece. In the case of Docker containers, I want to own the application configured in a very specific way. But I don't want to own keeping the machine alive and patched. And so, pick that platform where you are, and then jump in on Azure, and you can do some really amazing things. Awesome.
I'm sorry I missed it. I'll have to go and catch the recording.
It was recorded, and so hopefully you'll be able to see it, either dig into the MS Events app or, wherever they're going to publish the shows. It was a really cool talk.
Many years ago, before Ignite, when it was called TechEd, there would be a book of DVDs, burned DVDs of the video recordings, but only if you actually went to the conference so that you could see the ones. But now, even if you're not here, you can find this content online next week. That's amazing, just amazing accessibility.
Yeah, and they're doing live streams too, so you can even, real time it if you want to watch something right away.
It makes sense. So, Josh, what's been the highlight of the conference so far? You can't see everything.
No. I really liked the announcement around the new Windows Virtualized Desktop. That to me was really interesting. The Ultra SSDs, I think we were watching that like, whoa, that's crazy. I got one of my 2 talks out of the way, so that was good.
And tell us about that one. What was the topic?
So I did a talk yesterday on Core Azure Solutions automation for operations, which basically walked through how to use hybrid workers with Azure automation accounts to wire up logic apps that will actually fire over ITSM tickets. So into a ServiceNow instance, you can take an alert or some sort of an event that happens in Azure and actually create a ticket in ServiceNow from that. And then I walked through some of the Power BI visualizations around Azure AD and some of the activity log stuff that they have out of the box.
Awesome.
I was at that talk, and my favorite part of that talk was when Josh had a domain called Clown First. Yeah, so he's into clown ops.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I had a group of sysadmins that were a bunch of clowns, literally a bunch of clowns. Yeah. So
Awesome.
went over well.
Hey, I've heard it called edutainment. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're totally dry, then don't connect with the audience. That's great.
Yeah. So that was good.
Right. Okay.
It's that careful balance, though, because if I entertain you and you come away going, wow, that was a really elegant show, but I learned nothing, then it's hard there, too. At the same time, if I'm only teaching you content and you're just looking at your phone the whole time and you never saw any of the slides, then it made no impact on you. Mm-hmm. So I love that concept of edutainment, of can I get you involved and integrated into the thing, and then slip in some really cool things to get you really jazzed. Something that'll get you started as you go home.
Yeah, awesome. Now the SSDs, are they preview GA? Can people start using them? Certain regions?
I think that there was a region lock on it. I don't remember exactly. I just remember seeing the IOPS and like my head exploded because what was it, 160,000?
160,000 IOPS.
Yeah. I'm like, it's nuts.
Well, there's so many applications that are really IO bound. They don't need more processor cores. They don't really. Well, shoot, think of us in Visual Studio and just running the build. It's all about IO. I'm not using half the RAM I have on that machine or the CPUs. So that's really great.
Yeah.
Because, that's the way most .NET applications are as well. Even if it's not calling across to a database, it's right there on the box.
Yeah.
Okay, Colin, what's a highlight for you at the conference so far?
This is my first Ignite, and so it's been quite an eye-opening experience. I've been to quite a few conferences at Microsoft in Redmond, but we had 1,500 people, and that I considered a pretty large conference. So to get to a conference where there's 30,000 people, it's a different experience altogether. So we were just trying to think of the logistics of feeding everyone and moving everyone in and out of this venue. It's quite something. But I think I've tended to end up at a lot of data sessions this time. I'm not really a data guy. I do enough data to help organizations and teams manage their DevOps from a data perspective, but I'm a bit dangerous with SSMS. So don't put me in front of SSMS because I'm bound to get a DBA frustrated or angry or something. But SQL Managed Instances has been something I've been diving into. It's got some customers that it'll unlock cloud for them in a way that they haven't been able to go to before because they'll be able to use SQL Managed Instances to get their SQL workloads into the cloud without actually changing much of their application code. We've had some customers that have got linked database queries, for example. Now that prevents you from getting into SQL Azure or Azure SQL, and so that would require a whole bunch of re-architecture and rewriting, and so it's a very high-cost migration. But now with Managed Instances, they can just get their databases up into Managed Instances. They get all the advantages of SQL Azure, like backups and scaling and so on, and they still get a full SQL compat. So it's a pretty amazing product. I think it's going to open up cloud migration for a lot of teams that have been deferring that because of the need to rewrite those workflows. So that's a pretty impressive product.
Awesome. And Josh, you mentioned the remote desktop. Azure did have remote app, which was a service that kind of was deprecated. But there looks to be a lot of tech that might have been migrated to this one. Do you know any of the ins and outs of that yet? Because I know they just announced it.
Yeah, no, unfortunately I don't, but I plan on poking that heavily with some sticks because just from a developer VDI story, I've been in situations where that would have come in very handy, and I would love to see how that gets implemented. And the other part of it too is with the Office integration.
Yep.
Because if you use virtual machines in Azure right now and you install Office on them, you have to go through extra licensing and all that junk. And we actually had some people get in trouble for that. So not having to worry about that would be really good.
Yeah, definitely. So you have more talks coming up.
I have one more coming up.
And
Yes.
what's the topic there?
That one is fault-driven development.
Oh, provocative.
Indeed. So it's everyone's fault. No, I'm kidding. It's really about getting folks who are used to developing traditional on-premise applications into the mindset of moving that application to a place where not everything is always going to be working for you all the time. Data centers will get struck by lightning and all of a sudden things won't work for a couple days.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
that
guess.
never happens.
No, never, right? But being able to anticipate that, and I think it also adds a little bit more resiliency to your own code to be able to anticipate stuff like that and look at it from a business perspective. If I'm trying to perform this action and it doesn't work right away, how many times should I retry it? Or should I bottleneck it so that it doesn't actually take a bunch of things down with it if it gets flooded with requests? So it's kind of repositioning yourself from a development perspective on how to actually do that. And I have some examples and good stuff in there. So
Awesome. Let's go around and just talk about what you're doing for your day job, for what the current projects are. Rob, can we start with you?
I'm working on a project right now where I'm converting an app from .NET to .NET Core, and it's really fun to see those migrations. I've done that before, but this app had a whole lot of hooks into .NET, and so to be able to kind of lift that into the new platform is really exciting, and to see a lot of the work that they've done to make that really easy. Type forwarding makes that really painless because I can just reach into my full framework .NET components as well, and so that's really fun.
So you have a solution where some of the projects are .NET Core, some of the projects are full framework, and you're just bridging between them.
Yeah.
Now, is the runtime .NET Core or is the runtime full framework?
Right now, the runtime is it doesn't compile yet.
Okay. Well, some of that, now theoretically, it's all supposed to work.
Right.
From a practical perspective, I've already seen it work from the runtime being full framework and leveraging .NET Core 2 libraries. For instance, if the full framework is 4.6.2, I believe, or later, now that's the full framework that's compatible with Net Standard 2, and that's the bridge to Entity. In this case, the test case was Entity Framework Core version 2 was used and was a replacement for the ORM in a full framework application, and upgrading .NET Framework to 4.6.2 made it work and made everybody happy.
Nice. And that's a really good upgrade path because I can start at that back end and get my Entity Framework code up to .NET Standard. And then I can start working my way through the rest of the application. Can I pull business logic out and set that in .NET Standard? And then ultimately that final piece, that front end of, can I get my controllers into .NET Standard or .NET Core as well?
Right. Yeah, and from a runtime perspective, .NET Core is so much faster, especially on the ASP.NET side. But again, with so many applications being I/O bound, if you don't have a high-scale application, which there's tons of them out there, that's a good upgrade path to, and especially in the ORM space, Entity Framework Core version 2 specifically is so much better than 6 or any of the. I mean, it's night and day.
Right. And Entity Framework 6 was great when we were there. Doing 4.0 apps, it was wonderful once you got out of the EDMX world. But
there's a lot of people that would disagree with you on that.
We've learned a lot since then. And so, some of the uglier SQL queries are just gone. It's really fast and it's really nice.
So I presided over teams that literally kept using InHibernate until Entity Framework Core was ready. Just because, even with the code first, once it's just night and day. Night and day what you do with a completely code first and interface segregated library versus the one that was built from SQL Server towards .NET. And they tried, but they needed to start over from scratch.
It was interesting to see Link to SQL work from code to database and Entity Framework work from database to code. And the two of them kind of collided really badly, which is unfortunate. But ultimately what we ended up with was this kind of conglomeration of half UI, half code, half text transform templates, T4 templates.
Oh, the T4 templates, I remember those.
It got a little scary.
They still work if you...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Colin, what are you working on day to day?
Yeah, and I miss the days when I was just embedded in code all day. I still get to code a little bit for some open source stuff, but I'm doing a lot more kind of solutioning and frameworking at a higher level. So meet with customers and figure out what do they need to do to get to cloud, or what do they need to do to optimize, what do customers need to do from a CI/CD perspective. So that's more where I'm playing. So I've got a lot of customers that we're migrating from TFS to Azure DevOps. And there's lots of different paths of doing that. There's good ways and bad ways of doing that. So that's always an interesting conversation. And of course, with that comes how do you actually manage work in an agile way, right? How do you do an agile transformation in an enterprise where they're used to waterfall? So it's not just about I can bring CI/CD in. Well, that's great, but that's going to cause some friction with the waterfall folks, And if you're getting to automated deployments where you can deploy hundreds of times a day, but your testing isn't automated or isn't automated at that scale, that presents some other challenges, right? Because then you're going to be deploying stuff that's not fully tested, and so these things all have this really deep integration with each other, and that's what I love about ALM and DevOps is that as Donovan Brown puts it, that union of people and processes and products, and that's what gets me out of bed every day. So I'm still doing a lot of that, doing a lot more Azure and infrastructure stuff. Infrastructure as code. Is something which is a pretty hot topic at the moment, especially for enterprises. We took a customer from that took them about 2 months to deploy their infrastructure out into Azure. So they were in Azure, but it took them about 2 months to spin everything up. And using infrastructure as code and CI/CD through Azure DevOps, we were able to shrink that down to a couple hours. And so the productivity gains on that for an enterprise are just staggering. It doesn't. When our project sponsor presented to his board of his company, they were trying to find out where he had misplaced zeros, right? Because they couldn't believe that there was that much increase in productivity. So that's still an exciting time.
What's the infrastructure as code platform are you using? Are you using Terraform or Chef, or are you looking at Docker?
That's a great question. So in this particular case, we pushed Terraform. We do a lot of work with Terraform and a lot of our customers. This other particular customer, they didn't want to get into Terraform because they felt like there was so much churn in what they were learning. They were already familiar with ARM templates. So we were using ARM templates to spin up the VMs, and we're using PowerShell DSC through Azure Automation to actually configure the machines. Again, it's doing some pretty advanced stuff with DSC because they have legacy applications, and so there's a lot of stuff that we have to configure on those VMs, which
you're tied to VMs, of course.
Right. But in more modern workloads and in more modern applications, you probably wouldn't need to do those sorts of things. But their machines, it's a medical healthcare company, and their machines run the radiation machines to fight cancer. So it's pretty exciting to be involved in a company that's fighting cancer.
Yeah.
Right.
But there's still legacy applications there, right? But it's been amazing to see how those legacy applications that were written years ago for very specific machinery on premises, we can run them without any issue in Azure. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Day job?
So I'm similar to Colin, where I'm helping out with a lot of large scale transformations, both at the DevOps side and the Azure infrastructure side. So helping to kind of guide folks to architect the right things for the right uses and all that good stuff, using Azure DevOps heavily wherever I can. Fighting the good fight on that front, and going through and just putting together any kind of solution that folks are really needing to do. A lot of it is really enterprise driven. So you run into areas like governance. So a lot of enterprises will look at the cloud and kind of throw their hands up and I don't understand any of this. Like, how do we work this stuff? And you might run into some problems with InfoSec. They don't trust this, that, or the other thing. So helping to kind of bridge that knowledge gap and say, well, with management groups and with Azure policy and with Security Center, you can bring all of these things together into a holistic view, and you can lock things down so that you're not running into these terrifying situations where somebody just deployed a G2 machine into East Japan, and it's cranking up, and then somebody hacked it and put a Bitcoin miner on it, right? I mean,
not that happened.
No, never. No, I don't think it was a G2 machine, but principles there.
Right, of course. Colin, you mentioned the backwards compatibility. These things still work in Azure. I worked with a with a company that has code. Actually, he's actually a lifelong friend, and I remember when he was writing brand new active server pages code in 1997 and 98, and we helped him move everything that he has to Azure. He has a big back office Microsoft Access system that prints checks and things for running county fairs. And then he has an iPad app for judges to walk around and grade the entries, the pie, the art, and Wi-Fi, iPad connecting up. And then he has ASP.NET for online entries so that people can enter their animal into the fair. And then SQL Server, of course, right in the middle of it. But all of the server-side stuff, we moved it into Azure, and the compatibility story is just amazing. It was a non-event.
Yeah.
Really. It was just a few tweaks, configuration changes, and boom. It was working. He didn't have to change. Well, I think he changed 7 lines of code, but that's because there were just a few little things here and there.
Sure,
it was so easy.
Nice.
And it's entertaining to kind of dance through the rewrite story. But at that scale, it's like, I built this over the last dozen years.
Yeah.
I can't drop everything and start over.
Right.
And that would be fun. We all love our coding projects on the weekends. But I also want to sleep. And so being able to just kind of lift that workload into the cloud, that's really elegant.
I would argue that those are not fun. I think everybody probably understands or knows of Fred Brooks, the author of Mythical Man Month. Well, he has other essays in the same book, and one is the second system effect, which really talks about the large-scale rewrite and how even going back in the 60s and 70s, and then he revised the book in 2001, he still says those projects fail. Just flat out, they fail. So it's a scary proposition.
I love that compatibility story in Azure is really elegant to the point that you can get Cray in Azure now. And it's like, well, why would I want to run on a Cray? Well, if you're running on a Cray, that's why you want to run on a Cray. But that I can just go into the Azure portal and go file new Cray.
Right.
That's really sweet.
Also, Micro Focus that was acquired by Hewlett-Packard just not too long ago. Now Hewlett-Packard has completed their acquisition of the entire remaining COBOL world. They have a plugin in Visual Studio where the old COBOL code can now be compiled inside Visual Studio, and it's almost like the migration path for COBOL is to the Microsoft platform.
Nice.
It's amazing. And so once you're compiling in Visual Studio and running on a Windows kernel, now what's the barrier to get into Azure? I'm wondering. I don't know. But.
Yeah, if you're compiling it down to the standard framework or whatever, you can pump that into containers. You can pump that into anything.
Right.
Anything that'll run it.
And they have a product that bridges to SQL Server so that the code can still think that it's writing and reading to those ISAM files, but it's actually redirected to a SQL connection string.
Get out of here.
Nice.
Yes.
Oh, that's dope. That's nice.
Now, they charge a pretty penny for it.
Yeah.
Well, I remember working with a company a few years ago. They had mainframe applications on their back end. It was a bank organization, and the only way they could automate deployments was we wrote coded UI tests that went against the console for this mainframe.
Yeah.
Because there was no API hook, there was no REST interface, there was none of that.
It's all green screen, right?
So we ran coded UI tests against the green screen to do their deployment. So it felt very hacky, but we did what we had to do. We were bleeding edge and bleeding all over the place, but we got stuff done. Yeah.
Nice. So my mainframe story is a fun one. I was at a healthcare company, and it was used for HR payroll systems, and it was used for claims processing, a bunch of different things the mainframe was used for. And one of my first tasks was to get the HR system, which was a screen scraper, so written in classic ASP, scraping CICS screens for information. I was supposed to integrate that with Windows batch files and with the JCL jobs that ran on the mainframe to produce files. So I had to do like a crash course in COBOL, JCL, SAS, because I had to do the the obsidic to ASCII conversions to get it in the right format on the Windows machine, process it, convert it back to obsidic, push it back up using rsync. It was just bananas.
Yeah.
I still have nightmares about that.
Yep. Yeah, when we can in the Microsoft world, everything kind of runs on the same kernel, so we don't even have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, when you're going from kernel to kernel, which says no, files should be this way, not that way, there's a lot of differences.
And then you get into the fun of comp3 fields. So if you're familiar with those in COBOL, the compacted number fields.
Never worked with that.
Oh, you consider yourself lucky.
Awesome. So coming out of the conference, for the listeners who weren't here, I know we're only Wednesday, but are there any other things that they should be sure to look up and find the streaming videos on?
I just went to a talk on Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS, and I've just finished my certified Kubernetes administrator exam, which was, goodness, probably the toughest exam I've ever taken for any kind of certification, other than my nuclear physics in college days. But anyway, so Kubernetes is taking the world by storm, and AKS is a phenomenal managed service. If you've ever tried to set up your own AKS cluster, your own Kubernetes cluster, you will just realize how much work AKS saves you. But one of the things that they showed us today was with Kubernetes, you can do what's called horizontal scale out. So if you've got 2 pods and the pods are under pressure, you can scale out to 3 or 4 pods, right? But what happens if you start running out of nodes on the cluster? And there's not a lot about how do we actually scale out the nodes, and AKS takes care of that for you now, or it will very, very imminently. They'll release. They've got availability groups on the underlying nodes, and so you can, when you spin up a cluster, you can say, well, give me 2 nodes in an availability cluster. And shrink it down to 1 when there's low usage, and go up to 4 when there's high usage, and then it'll just take care of spinning up new nodes for you on the back end. The other thing which was mind-blowing is they have something called a virtual kubelet, where it lets you burst out into ACI. So let's say you've got 20 pods and your cluster can manage 30 pods, right? So you might be able to scale those other 10, but what if you suddenly have a workload that needs 5,000 pods? Well, you could wait around for the VMs to spin up in the availability group, and it's going to take a while because it's got to spin them up and join them to the VNets and all that stuff. So instead of doing that, you can burst out using the ACI connector, and it creates a virtual kubelet where essentially you get this node that has infinite capacity because it'll just...
Acronym, please. ACI,
Azure Container Instances. Right, so Azure Container Instances lets you run a single container or a single pod, essentially, right? So instead of spinning up a whole cluster, you can just spin up 1 pod. But now you can integrate that as a backend onto the Azure Kubernetes cluster, and it essentially serves as if it's a node that has infinite capacity, right? Because you can literally spin up millions of ACI nodes, and you only pay for the processing power that they use, and when they spin down, you're not charged anymore. So you get this infinitely scalable node. And it's a little bit mind-blowing because that gives some real interesting burst capabilities. So
yeah.
I've been chasing that virtual kubelet for a good long time because I love that concept.
Yeah.
I feel like that the nodes in AKS are still too big. When I go from 1 node to 2 nodes, I'm paying for a whole nother virtual machine.
Right.
And what's really elegant about that virtual kubelet, connecting it into that infinite pool of ACI, is that as I scale from 5 pods to 6 pods, I'm not taking that additional virtual machine hit.
Right.
And then when the pods spin down, then I'm done.
Yep.
It's really elegant. I know they're not there yet, but what I see coming is a 0-node cluster where I have AKS's management tier that I'm not paying for at all.
Yep.
And I have ACI that just runs my pods that I need. And so I just scale up and scale down as I need to.
Yep. Yeah, where the scaling is at the pod level. I mean, that's really interesting. Yeah.
It's a really granular control, and I really, really like that.
Yep.
And for the Visual Studio teams who are saying, okay, but I'm waiting on Windows containers, because of course, if you're a .NET shop, over at the Windows containers booth, I was speaking to them and really pressuring for, okay, when is it really going to be ready and integrated with everything else? Are we going to be at the end of 2019? And I was able to get the reactions like, no, not anything like that time frame. So while they're not putting out a time frame, to time box them a little bit.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's imminent. It's imminent.
I love the analogy of what's the difference between XML HTTP request and AJAX. And from a technical perspective, the answer is, well, nothing. They're exactly the same. But from a usage perspective, XML HTTP request powered Outlook Web Access in the 90s. It gave us a right-click menu. AJAX powered Facebook and Google Maps and that site that you're going to build tomorrow. Containers were already there. Docker brought this really elegant ecosystem around it that made it really, really easy. And because containers and namespaces and jails and whatever we wanted to call it was already there in Linux, then Docker could build up this ecosystem pretty easily around that thing. Well, all of these constructs in this monokernel of Linux don't exist in a microkernel of Windows. So yeah, we need to go build in namespaces and overlay networks. And so, getting Docker to Windows is hard. They're doing a fantastic job, but yeah, I can't just push the, make it go faster button and have it appear. But there's really interesting things like LCOW, Linux Containers on Windows, where they're using that kind of Linux subsystem for Windows to pull off some really interesting things. And it's not actually running in Linux subsystem for Windows, but they use Hyper-V as a sandbox, not necessarily as a virtualization platform, to pull off these Linux containers running on the Windows kernel. So Windows containers on Windows and Linux containers on Windows, it's like Windows is becoming that base platform where I can run all the things, which is really interesting. 10 years ago, we were like, well, that's Linux, that's Unix.
Well, let's do some philosophy here, because there's some really experienced people right here at this table. 5 years from now, or if it's not by 5, 7, some number of years from now, we're talking about a transition here. And the people listening are probably thinking, okay, I got a .NET app. What do I need to be doing this? Do I need to be doing that? What do I need to do? So 5 years from now, and definitely 10 years, where are we going to land? So let's try to predict the future to help people out so that they can know whether they need to start doing something now or whether they wait for a little bit and it'll be easier. So someone has a Visual Studio app on SQL Server. What do?
We can take that same process and let's look at 10 years ago, where did we think we would be compared to where we are? I would argue that there isn't a land, there isn't a stop. We went from COM to Classic ASP to .NET. We're now going to .NET Core. This is a journey, and we're going to keep getting better at it, but we're never going to stop. If you want to learn that last technology that will carry you through the rest of your career, go learn farming. Technology isn't it. We can shake the magic 8-ball, but I can't guess where we'll be in 5 years.
But for instance, the virtual machine transition. People would screw in a physical server and they would install things on a server, and then virtual machines came around.
Yeah.
Well, you think, okay, do I wait out virtual machines for the next thing because it's going to be a really short transition? Or no, do I need to get all my physical servers transitioned over to virtual machines? Because as we've seen, it's been, a decade plus.
Yeah, virtual machines had a really long run, and that was nice. Right, and I would argue that we're moving from virtual machines to containers.
Yeah.
And so, I suspect containers will be part of that story. Will containers look like they do today? I don't know, but I suspect that container type of experiences will be right there.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll make a prediction. Rob seemed to be hedging a little bit, so I'll make a prediction. I'll put it out there. So I think Kubernetes and containers is the way of the future. Just the benefits that you get for containerizing your app and its configuration and its operating system and its dependencies all into this really neat image is phenomenal. Everyone loves that aspect about it. Running multi-container applications and microservices in a cluster is a harder problem to solve, because now you've got networking and security and isolation and all these things to consider. And again, Kubernetes steps in and just is such an elegant solution to that orchestration issue. So I really think Kubernetes and containers is what you want to get into. I went to another talk today. I actually tweeted it out to say, because the title was something like SQL 2019 High Availability on Kubernetes. Mm-hmm. And I tweeted out the picture and said, this is not your daddy's Microsoft. Like, this is a talk at Microsoft Ignite about SQL running on Linux in a Kubernetes cluster with high availability. Like, this is where we're going. Like, I think that it's probably worthwhile getting into .NET Core. If you're a .NET shop, it's probably worthwhile getting into .NET Core because it'll fast track you on the container thing. I think the Windows containers are going to get there, but they're going to take a while to get there. So I think I think getting to .NET Core has a lot of advantages, but the fact that it also opens up containerization on Kubernetes on Linux is just a phenomenal bonus. Never mind everything else that you get with .NET Core. So that would be my thing is SQL 2019 on Kubernetes with .NET Core on Linux containers in Kubernetes in AKS.
And the closer that you get to production with data stores, probably you don't want to look towards containerization. Probably you want to look to data store as a service. Look at SQL Azure, look at Cosmos DB,
sure.
Because they're going to handle uptime and they're going to handle backups, and that's really elegant. But where data store in containers really makes a lot of sense is in dev test scenarios. Right. Because it's like, well, how do I deploy that exact flavor of whatever? And do I teach all my developers how to walk through the SQL Server install or how to get Postgres running? Docker Compose up. Or kubectl schedule the pod. That becomes a really, really elegant play there. And so the development containers will run that full scope back and forth. But I would argue the database in production needs to be as a service.
Sure. The machine learning thing is the one thing that you don't get on the SQL PaaS at the moment that you do get in SQL Server on Linux in Kubernetes is you get the ability to run R and some of the machine learning stuff. So there's still some use cases where we would go that, but yeah, pushing PaaS for data storage is where you want to default to.
Yeah, and R running in SQL Server, that was just cool. I saw a Java app running inside SQL Server demo the other day, and I was just like, well, first off, why would I ever want to do that? But also, second off, that was awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Josh, what's your prediction?
We're all moving back to the mainframe. All of us. We're all going to have VAX VMS terminals and just be plugged in somewhere into the ether. I'm kidding.
Well, there's 5 mainframes, right? Azure's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. AWS, GCP.
It actually is like that. We're going to have this dumb terminal. I mean, with virtual desktops, I don't even have to have it. I don't even have exactly. I can use my iPad to do my development on Visual Studio, connected up to the cloud. So yeah, we're getting back to this dumb terminal.
Yeah, it's now called Azure Cloud Shell instead.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have a prediction. I think we're all going to land on PaaS, and that Microsoft's Azure data centers and everybody else are going to use containers as the bridge to not go straight from their PaaS offering to how Azure manages the VMs that make up the PaaS offering, but the PaaS offerings are going to be built upon the container services, which will then be on top of the virtual machines and then on top of the physical. So I think where we're going to land is that the C# programmer who writes that C# code and puts data into SQL Server won't have to know or care about these intermediary concepts. They'll just have a way to write their code and say, Azure, run my stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Whether I'm right or not. But I see you nodding your heads, which gives me a lot of good affirmation. So thank you.
I like it. I like it.
That is a good point.
I've heard Kelsey Hightower make a similar argument, where Kubernetes is an implementation detail and one that developers may not need to care about. Let the CI/CD pipeline wrap it in a container and ship it off.
Yeah.
But developers just develop. And that's intriguing.
One implementation detail that may bleed. Right now, we're packaging application components as NuGet packages, but we may end up packaging our application components in the container image format. That could happen.
Yeah.
Because there does need to be a packaging format that is holistic for what does it mean to give something to Azure and say, run my stuff.
Right. Yeah. I'd argue we're already doing that in some respects. Like if you look at even things like Azure PowerShell or Azure CLI as a container, being able to either execute that dynamically or statically on your local machine, it's still packaged in that format.
Yeah.
So I think that's already begun.
Yeah.
I could see an interesting thing if containers got interfaces, UIs, because now I could start to package my desktop apps that way. And now instead of installing all of my software on my PC, I just launch all the containers that do all the things. How often do we have that interaction between Outlook and Chrome? I'm just picking 2 random apps. But, which one wrote the wacky registry settings? If all of those could run inside of containers, and now I just, boot up the set of containers that I need today, that could be a really elegant solution.
Oh, good point.
Yeah, that's similar to using like exports. So if you're
Right.
using Linux and you want to, spin up a Visual Studio Code container image, you can actually pipe that UI back into your own personal desktop, which is pretty sweet. You can't do that with Windows right now. I had a little bit of a bender a while back where I wanted to try and do that, and display driver writing is not for me. So I just kind of gave that one up. But
X is really interesting because it separates the rendering of the UI from the running of the application, and we don't really have that abstraction in Windows. In Windows, I'm writing my app to the screen.
Well, thanks so much for the great conversation. And the conference is only halfway done, so there's a lot more of excitement to come. So I
definitely.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for having
It's
us.
unfortunate that this won't be published in time, but it's like, come join us at the conference. Come watch the live stream.
Yeah, right.
Come bump up into us in the hallway. It'd be really fun.
Right, exactly. All right. Well, have a great rest of the conference, gentlemen.
Thanks, you
Thanks.
too.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.